in order to understand the Molinist analysis of these issues like predestination, providence, and whatnot, I think we need to understand a very key element in Molinism called middle knowledge, which somehow, I don't know how we skipped over that. That's kind of like the thing. Yeah. So the issue with Molinism, or the project of Molinism that it's trying to advance, is that traditionally there are two views there are two different things that Orthodox Christians have believed for a very long time. The first one is what's called the traditional view of providence, which means that God is he's sovereign over creation. There's nothing out there that's outside of his control. He's essentially running the universe. But at the same time, there's this view that human beings are morally responsible. We have free will. We can kind of rebel against God if we so desire, things like that. And the Molinist project is, actually, pretty much any project of providence, so whether it's Arminianism or open theism or Calvinism, Thomism, whatever, there are a whole lot of them out there. Basically, the whole project is we need to bring these two ideas together. And the deterministic solutions, like Thomism and Calvinism, for example, they tend to emphasize the sovereignty, and wherever that seems to be incompatible with the free will thing, they either, I'll be fair, I'm being fair here, but they do kind of redefine free will into compatibilist terms to say whatever we mean by free will, it must be compatible with determinism because we have determinism in our sovereignty, our account of sovereignty. And then on the flip side, you have people like open theism that they take as basic that free will is libertarian, and whatever we mean by sovereignty, it's got to be compatible with this view of free will. The Molinist project is much more audacious, which says actually we can take free will in its strongest form and sovereignty and providence in its strongest form and bring them together. And the way that this is done is through the doctrine of omniscience. So God knows all things is what that means. And Molina said, the classically leading up to Molina, there was this division of God's knowledge, conceptual division, not actual division, that said God knows two types of things, what's called natural knowledge and what's called free knowledge. And what that means is that God knows everything about himself, he knows everything he can do, and he can know every possible way that the world could be. Then he knows that prior to creation. Then at the moment of creation, he creates the universe, and now he has what's called free knowledge. This is free knowledge that God more or less gives himself because of his free decision to create the universe. And this free knowledge contains knowledge of the actual world, all things that are past, present, and future, including, most controversially, the future actions of free creatures. So if you are a compatibilist, then you would say the reason God knows future free decisions is because God determined them. If you're an open theist, for example, you would say God actually doesn't know future free decisions because they are intrinsically unknowable. They're just the kind of thing that are unknowable. But Molina would agree with the Thomist and the Calvinist that actually God does know future free actions. And what he had in mind was that there's another layer of knowledge called middle knowledge. Middle because it's in between natural and free knowledge. And this is a little weird, but it's the knowledge of what every free creature would do in any given circumstance. So God knows first that what any creature could do, all the possible options. But he knows that if that creature were put in that circumstance, it's impossible for the creature to make all of those decisions at once. Ultimately, he has to pick one decision and go with it. And God knows what that is. But here's the controversial part. God knows what that is before the creature is even created, or before the world is even created, or before God even decides if he wants to create a world in the first place. God just knows this intrinsically. So keep that in mind, that God knows what any creature would do in any circumstance. So what was the original question? Because I forgot.
So the question is, how do these views, primarily just how do these views of free will affect salvation? And then more specifically, how do your specific systems interact with salvation? What does that really mean?
So we probably need to talk a little bit about grace. The idea is that everyone is going to agree that God saves his people through grace. But the question is whether the creatures can resist that grace or not. If you are an Arminian, Arminius had this view of prevenient grace, which By the way, a side note, there's a lot of shared terminology between Arminianism and Molinism. Unfortunately, Arminius did not do really good scholarship in this area, and in many ways borrowed and then totally twisted and redefined a lot of the terms. So unfortunately, prevenient grace today means something very different than what Molina had in mind. But in Arminius's mind, human beings were brought by grace, apart from their sinful nature, to a point of neutrality, where they can make that free will decision: am I going to be a Christian or not? And like an analogy would be, they're drowning in the ocean, and God throws a little life raft to them and says, please take the rope, and they can say, no, I don't want the rope, and stupid stuff like that. But Molina had a much stronger view of grace, which said the grace that God offers is it is prevenient in the sense that it's offered before the creature does anything. But that grace is so strong that it will pull you all the way to salvation. So the strongest that Arminius' grace would do is it would pull you to neutrality, and that's it. In Molina's view, grace is going to pull you as long as you don't resist it. And it's going to pull you not to a point of neutrality, but all the way to salvation, all the way to the point of regeneration, where God will regenerate your heart supernaturally. So where does free will come into play? Every time that God draws an individual, they have a free will choice. They can either do nothing or they can resist. And then God will bring them into another circumstance, another circumstance of grace. And they can resist or they can do nothing. And then there's another one. And basically, all the way up to the moment of regeneration. So free will here is that you're never pulled towards God against your will. And you're also never agreeing with God, yeah, I'm going to go along with this. You're just doing nothing, and you're allowing any good work that you do is the Spirit moving through you. So Molina was really a lot more Protestant than a lot of modern Protestants, honestly, on this issue. So yeah. So I think that answers the question, that free will is here, that it allows you to resist the pulling of the Spirit, but it doesn't enable you to do good works.